Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Tom Singer and Craig Brown.
Well, hello there, and welcome back to, or if it's your first time, welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Thank you so much for coming along on the journey of this show that we designed to be a resource for those who work in and around PLM. The Digital Enterprise Society, it is a forum for the exchange of ideas surrounding the tools, processes, and practices used across the product lifecycle. To learn more, visit digitalenterprisesociety.org. My name is Tom Singer, and I have the honor to co-host this show with Craig Brown, an industry veteran and former PLM leader at General Motors. Hey, Craig, how are you today?
I'm very good, Tom. It's about mid-April, and we have an interesting show today, a little bit different than what we've been doing, and the times require it, given everything that's going on in the world.
Yeah, I mean, we've been on quarantine for a little over a month now at this point that we're making this recording, and we thought it was a good idea to maybe talk about some things that are going on around the industry that are impacting this whole research and everything else around COVID. So I'm really excited about today because every week we try to bring to this podcast interesting interviews and other ideas that are going to help all the listeners enhance and grow their careers and just be more creative. And today's show, I think, is going to get us way out of the box. So I'm really
I was pleased. The where I worked for years at General Motors. One of the things my former company is doing is they're in the middle of Indiana, taking what used to be an electronics plant and turning it into a ventilator plant. And people can read about that. But the things we do in PLM can really enable that much more quickly than in the past. And I've heard some interesting summaries, the interaction between the two companies, the people that know how to mass produce and this relatively small engineering force at Vintech that does a particular ventilator. So it's interesting, and I think this is why we need to talk about this now, is what we are all a part of, what we all develop in terms of tools and processes can really make us very responsible, very reactive to the current challenges we have.
Yeah, and about a month ago, I had a conversation with our friend Dr. Nate Hartman from Purdue. And in the course of that conversation, he was telling me what they were doing in his research lab there at Purdue University. And I got really excited. I'm like, we have to get you onto the podcast because it's so topical. So Nate is a professor and the department head for computer graphics at Purdue University. He is also the co-director of the Indiana Manufacturing Competitiveness Center. So, hey, Nate, welcome back, because you were actually our first guest ever, I think, if I've got this right. Welcome back to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast.
Thanks, Tom. Good to be with you and Craig again.
So, we try really hard to have some interesting topics, and I got really excited about the stuff that you guys were doing, like days into this quarantine, when all of a sudden they were making this outcry that they needed ventilators and other medical equipment. Can you take us back there and just sort of tell us a little bit about what was going on in the early days of this a month ago?
Sure, Tom. So this started, like you said, about 4 weeks ago for us. We were just into the time period when most of the state governments, at least here in the Midwest, had begun urging people to stay home. Purdue, as a university, had was just in the midst of returning from spring break, and that was met with the president's and board of trustees' decision to take the rest of our coursework remote for the rest of our academic semester. And not long after that, many of the public schools here in Indiana began to also suspend and then ultimately move online their courses for the rest of the academic school year. And so we were all in this situation where our world was beginning to get turned upside down, just like everyone else's. And so I don't remember exactly which day it was, but again, it was about 4 weeks ago. And I was copied into a series of email exchanges, about 7 or 8 different ones. But yet, between myself and a couple other people, we were common to each one of those 7 or 8 different email exchanges. And it was faculty and staff from across the university. Some of it was senior administration. Some of it was some of our industry partners. Some of it was concerned alumni who were reaching out. And essentially, it all boiled down to, okay, what is or what can the university do in order to help battle this this pandemic? And excuse me, it became very apparent very early on that we all had a capacity to be able to design and manufacture things. Now that might sound a little bit obvious. However, what started off as 7 or 8 disparate yet somewhat related email threads has now converged into about 50 people across 6 of the 10 academic colleges at the university, plus 6 of our research labs that have design and manufacturing capability. So we have people from, faculty, staff, and graduate students and undergraduate students actually helping do this. Because not all students went home, if you will, after classes were put online. There are some who actually remained, as is the case across many universities at the moment. Some don't necessarily have the means or the desire to immediately go back home. And so some of them are still here. And so they're helping to the extent that they can, to the extent that our different policies allow. But it's basically people from the Polytechnic Institute, the College of Engineering, the School of Nursing, the College of Pharmacy, the College of Health and Human Sciences, both from a biological perspective, but also from a consumer sciences perspective. I can explain that in a moment. And from the College of Liberal Arts, our theater department. And I can explain that also in just a few minutes.
I followed you with everything except for the theater department, but we'll get to that.
They communicate. They know how to communicate.
That's actually not it.
Okay. Well, I guess wrong.
So we are making what we just sort of categorize as hard and soft PPE or personal protective equipment. So the hard PPE is things like safety glasses or face shields or the different connectors and tubing components for ventilators. We're also working on a prototype for a reusable respirator mask. You've heard about, I'm sure, some of those in the news being in short supply. And on the soft side of the PPE, we're now into making various types of gowns and bodysuits and the floppy hats and or caps that they wear in a hospital environment, and also foot covers. That's where our colleagues from consumer sciences and from theater have come in, because it's the costume department folks who have large scale cutting and sewing capabilities, as well as in the consumer sciences department at Purdue, there is a textiles and design and manufacturing group. And so again, they have larger sort of commercial level cutting and sewing capability. And so we're up to a point, assuming that our raw materials hold out, which, our supply chain, so to speak, is being squeezed like a lot of other people's is at the moment. But we have a capacity to make about 1,000 face shields a day, somewhere between 500 and 1,000 ventilator breathing apparatus components a day, depending upon what the component is. Some of the ones with a straight line axis are fairly easy to machine. The others are a little more complicated, so they take more steps. But then as far as gowns and bodysuits and hats and so on, we can make about 500 a day. And so
Nate, this reminds me when you and I first met years ago with a student activity, which we don't need to get into right now, but it was an international thing, and you approached me, and I think we were in Vancouver of all places. And we got to talking about the importance of collaboration across the disciplines. And it's very satisfying to me to hear groups, wherever they are, I'm sure it's happening many places, go across these domains and answer the question, well, I have sewing equipment, or I have material science, or I have an ability to produce plastic molded parts. And right now, people are just figuring out how they can be a part of the solution, not be part of the problem. It's very, very nice. Your volume surprises me. I mean, I think a lot of people don't appreciate that there are programs like yours that can actually produce hundreds of things. And so fill us in a little bit there. What was the foresight? Because it wasn't this pandemic, and it's great that you can now help, but what was behind that decision to have that kind of capacity at the center there that you help co-direct?
Well, we are very much what I like to refer to as a working laboratory. Much of what we do in INMAC is based on the fundamentals of a working laboratory and a working factory. I think
that's right. It's a laboratory for factories to understand flow and okay, I got it.
Exactly. Now, to be fair, it's not necessarily an efficient factory like you might find in terms of mass production at, say, a normal company. However, it is very much a connected factory. And even though our focus is on digital tools, digital data, digital methods, so on and so forth, in this concept of a model-based digital enterprise, the fact of the matter is that we have machine tools. We have CNC tools. We have forming tools. We have additive tools. We have composite layup and production tools. We have injection molding tools, and so on and so forth. The idea being is that during I'll say a non-pandemic time, we run products through those as a way to gather digital data and to study those methods and processes. However, in a time like this, where there's certainly a social need, well, a lot of us around here know how to design and make things. So we can scale that up in a way that allows us to bring those resources to bear. And so we have approximately 6 research laboratories on campus that have some combination of every single one of those production methods I just mentioned, usually at least 3 or 4 different ones. And so that's why I say when we're working across 6 academic units, we've got a team of about 50 people. Not all of them are necessarily in my lab, but my lab is working as the hub to connect all of them because we have cloud-based design tools. We are using Microsoft Teams as our collaborative hub to communicate with each other and to talk about things. We happen to be, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I know you mentioned Teams. I work with a couple other companies, and one of them is international based, and a lot of companies have been disrupted by what's going on. And I just want to emphasize the use of tools, even tools to collaborate in a meeting. The companies that have figured that out, we're not seeing a drop in business. And in fact, we're seeing actually a little bit of an increase in business. And so this is my sales pitch to all of you listening. This is why product lifecycle management and all of its tools and processes are so bloody important, is we can adjust quickly, and we can also fill a need when there's a terrible situation like what we're currently in. And I just think people collaborating, it's great. It wasn't that long ago till everybody's had a lab and everybody had their own machine tools, and everybody said, well, as long as you follow my process, we can go build something for you. And here you guys are, you're building stuff, not just 1 or 2, but hundreds within a few weeks. This is just really, really good.
So Craig, we've gone from those email exchanges 4 weeks ago to about a week ago. So from emails to full production in about 3 weeks.
Which is absolutely amazing when you think about the fact that you're a university. You're there to teach students, not to be a manufacturing center.
But this is but this is the best way to teach them, is give them a real world problem. This is how Nate and I got to know each other in the first place, right?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, Tom, to that point, it's and Craig, to your point about connectivity and about us just simply being a university, I think this is why I like to tell people that this is a working lab, meaning we do real things here. And one of the things that we've always had a dispensation towards, I think, at Purdue is our land grant mission for the state of Indiana. And so that is something that's, I think, incredibly important. Where Craig lives, that's Michigan State. Tom, where you live, that's Texas A&M. So, it's one of those things where, we don't particularly take this lightly. In fact, there's a person that I interact with every few days from the governor's office who is asking us, where are your levels? Where do you see them? Where have they been? And what I've told people through this whole thing is, we're not going to be anyone's sole supplier because, to be fair, we are a university. We're not a manufacturing company who does these things day in and day out. However, we are a group that can very much put our finger in the dam so that the dam doesn't break. And so as these, as I look over at my whiteboard, I've got 15 names of either healthcare systems or different counties in Indiana who are receiving products from us. And so none of which are we asking any money for. And so it is, these are systems who need our help. These are counties who need our help, right? Their supply chains, for whatever reason, have not been able to keep up with the demand and the request. And so we're there to try to, put a finger in the hole in the dam so that it doesn't break.
So Nate, think for a moment, and it's really probably difficult at this exact point in time, but back up for just a second. Share with us the biggest surprise that was positive and the biggest thing you wish was better.
I think the biggest surprise that I think is positive is actually something that you alluded to earlier, is the collaboration amongst this diverse group of people.
Yep, and just need a common enemy, right?
Right. But that being said, is we embraced technology. We embraced a technology, or actually a collection of about 3 or 4 different technologies that all of us could use and that did not necessarily get in the way of what it was we were trying to do. And so we picked tools that were generally approachable and digestible and easy for people to get their heads around. And then it allowed us to do what we really wanted to do, which was collaborate and create a solution for a problem. And and that being said, I also think that even independently of the technology, the people's our team's willingness and the people who are on the team to come together around a common problem, regardless of our respective disciplines and regardless of our particular pedagogical or some might even argue dogmatic training.
Well, yeah, and you and I have had that discussion over the years. We won't take the time today to refresh it, but it is frustrating in organizations, any kind of organization, whether it's educational or big enterprise or even a small company, the different fiefdoms, they do what they do in a fiefdom. They set up a process and they want people to follow their process, right? In this kind of climate, you can't do that, right? You've got to be able to break down those barriers and get to a common interest or a common objective. So
one of the things that did surprise me is, I think, how not ready the medical community's supply chain was for this kind of a pandemic. And
it's really disappointing. I couldn't agree with you more.
Well, and I think that the issue is, leaving aside some of the political and economic consternations around this, I think if nothing else, maybe this pandemic and what's happening with it, and the fact that a lot of grassroots efforts very similar to ours have had to spring up in order to, plug a number of holes in the dam. I think it might be a lesson learned in just how important a resilient supply network is. Not a supply chain, but a supply network. And furthermore, how important it is to continue to design and manufacture things within the United States.
Yep, you're exactly right. And that's going to probably frustrate folks around the world that listen, but it's all about resiliency. You hit the nail on the head. We need to talk about supply chain resiliency more than we talk about supply chain efficiency. And efficiency can drive, lean, which is good if you're just a financial guy or a shareholder, but it's really bad when you find out the one supplier in Japan, I'm thinking about Fukushima a few years ago, ended up affecting everybody in all car industries because they're the only people that manufactured a particular kind of paint fleck of all things, right?
Mhm.
So efficiency is good to a limit. Resiliency is just as important. I hope we fix that.
Mhm. Well, and I think in the spirit of our podcast, right, and the organization Digital Enterprise Society, on behalf of which we're doing this, I think people can leverage technology. People can leverage the ubiquity of information. People can leverage the form and the insight that's derived from that information to help make a supply chain or supply network, more resilient. Now, it's not the only thing that'll do it, but it's certainly one of the enabling things.
So how many students, either graduate or undergraduate, are working with you, and what do you think they'll take away from this? Do they even appreciate that we've never experienced this before? The people teaching them are learning right with them, right?
Well, I think that's an interesting question. I think across my lab and the other 5, I think we have about 18, students, give or take, across those 6 labs, and as well as a couple that are producing out of their apartment at the moment. But my hope is that they'll take away from this, I think, is that whether they realize it or not, they're applying a lot of the things that I think we have tried to teach them in a classroom, whether they realize it or not. I think they're watching us, even as faculty and staff, sort of bang our heads against the wall at times, trying to sort out a particular problem for various things. There was an example that we've been tinkering with. It came to us from the Purdue Fire Department, and they have those full face respirator masks that they want to be able to connect a reusable HEPA or FEMA filter to. Well, it just so happens that the fitting, the threaded fitting that's required to do that, is not a standard part. And so we
won't go there, like how'd that happen, but never mind.
So we've had to resort to laser scanning and mics and calipers and so on to be able to make something. Very early on in this, one of our local hospital systems, brought to us a situation where they had their full body suits that have the external oxygen canisters on them, right? Just so happened to be made by 2 different manufacturers. So what's flashing through my head is that scene in Apollo 13.
That's what I was just thinking of.
They're trying to shove the square canister into the round hole kind of thing because it was made by 2 different government contractors, So it essentially was the same sort of thing, right? The fitting between the hose and the oxygen canister from one manufacturer was not the same as the other. And the problem was they could not get enough oxygen canisters from either manufacturer in order to be able to do what they needed to do. And so they brought us a suit. We laser scanned the 4 different ends and eventually merged them together and made 2 different sets of connectors. And
bravo.
So people can put their fingers in their ears and say, see no evil and hear no evil. But, at the end of the day, we had to make something that was going to allow them to use those bodysuits and not let them go to waste. And so,
and it's for everybody who's listening. This is a history lesson. 50 years ago, I think tomorrow, maybe today.
Yep.
That oxygen tank on Apollo 13 exploded, and we had 3 astronauts floating halfway between the moon and the Earth, and we had to figure out how to get them back. You know what? Amazing collaboration happened then. It was without digital tools like we have today, but it was with a lot of smart people who were given a box of parts. It's really similar to what you described, Nate.
Yeah.
And they were given about 12 hours. What are you going to do with this box of parts to make sure we get enough oxygen to get them around the moon and get back?
So
right?
that's one of my favorite scenes from any movie, when he dumps that whole box out and says, these are the only things they have. You have to make it work. And it essentially was, duct tape and gauze and whatever. But, what I was thinking of when you were saying that is, what kind of case studies are going to come out, not just from Purdue, but Purdue's one of 50 or 100 major research universities. And then look at all the companies that are trying to retool their assembly lines to get in to be able to provide help. What kind of case studies do you think are going to come out of this where we're going to look back and say, we grew as in the world of manufacturing and production and design because of COVID?
So, Tom, I think it's that's a really interesting question because for us, while for example, the two scenarios I just described with the fittings, right? We've had those two plus one or two, depending on how you count them, one or two more situations like that where we've probably sunk some IP into this and developed something that is not necessarily a commercial product at the moment, but it fits a niche, right? So I'm sure that there's going to be a number of universities and companies across the world who have done things like that, right? You can go on the news right now and you can look at various things that they've done in South Korea or in Italy or in other places that were hit in some of the early days of this, a couple months ago, and look at how people were resilient there, and you looked at how people were creative. And so I think really in some cases it's in as much as the technology and the stuff is interesting to talk about, I actually think maybe some of the more poignant case studies can be in how people collaborated, how people communicated, how people, I'll say, solved problems with some very open-ended and ambiguous scenarios, right? How people were able to, or in some cases not, prioritize different things from a decision-making perspective. And at the end of the day, a lot of that is part and parcel to the sorts of open-ended problem solving and communication type techniques that a lot of companies want in their employees.
Well, it's true. And problem solving based on the things that are defining success, right? For so long, success meant maybe financial efficiency. And right now, success means limiting the number of people that die as a result of all this. And I think, I think it's just fabulous, Nate, what you and the team there at Purdue are doing.
So I have another question.
I think it's something that PLM world should do more of, and we'll find out in a moment. Go ahead, Tom.
No, I have another question. So are you collaborating with the other research universities around the country, and is that leading to new relationships that can have other effects for Purdue and your success with collaborating with other universities and your peers around the country?
I would say to some extent we are. It varies a little bit by group. There's also, in some cases, it varies a little bit by state. And so I bring that up for a couple of reasons. One is there have been some very early, somewhat conceptual, but some early collaborations between Purdue and a few other universities around the country, particularly as it related to the ventilators. So we have a sub team that's part of the bigger one that I described, working on the design of essentially a low cost, relatively easy to manufacture ventilator. So they're in their final stages of FDA approval at the moment. And so our hope is, fingers crossed, that we'll get that out fairly soon, because frankly, Indiana as a state is not scheduled to peak, if you will, in our COVID cases for another 2 weeks or so.
Right.
And so, so that's one example. The other one is closer to home. So the way Indiana's higher education system is structured, Indiana University is where the School of Medicine is. Purdue doesn't have a School of Medicine, but yet we collaborate with IU around medical related things, from a design and manufacturing perspective in particular, but it's usually around medical applications. We collaborate with them a fair bit. And so they have on their staff people who are MDs in pulmonology or anesthesiology or those kinds of things, Tom. So I would say from a state perspective, between Purdue and IU, even a little bit in some of our satellite campuses, and even with Notre Dame, there's been a little bit of collaboration between the schools around some of these common items.
Well, Nate, thanks again. I'd expect nothing less from you guys. I've been into your lab a few times, and I'm always surprised what happens next. And right now, we need all hands on deck. So this is really great. Now, to all of you out there listening, I'm sure there are other examples of extraordinary efforts being applied right now to help with this situation. And we'd love to hear from you. If you could reach out to us with an email at the Digital Enterprise Society, Courtney and I and Tom, we can bring maybe other insights from the Digital Enterprise Society membership on helping during this crisis time with COVID-19. So please, by all means, take a moment and reach out to us if you've got a story to tell. This is kind of where Tom and I'd like to go for the next month or so, maybe longer. I'm afraid this is going to be a multi-month thing until we get through it, everybody.
And I actually think Craig has a great idea with that, because out there between everybody who listens, and our listenership is growing, people come from a variety of companies who manufacture a variety of things. I bet there's some really interesting stories of people who have either stuck their toe in or dove in full body to be able to help solve some of these problems that are faced across the country and across the world. So make sure you let us know, and maybe we'll be interviewing you next.
And it could even be as simple as how you're collaborating across your extended office, now that offices include our home offices, right? I don't mean to say that it has to be producing parts for a hospital. I mean, that's really important. But even keeping the economy going is important, and just being able to work. I am fortunate enough to continue to in some of my consulting engagements because their business is fine, and it's actually surprising to me, but healthy surprising, and it's because we're virtual. We're it's largely a software company that does things for people that develop software. So it's an easier thing to take home, right? Nate, do you have any closing thoughts for us?
Well, first, I would simply say thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk with you all today. Certainly, it's it's nice to be recognized for the work that we're doing here at Purdue. I guess my last comment would simply be, maybe it's a little bit less technical and maybe a little bit more personal, but I think it's important when you have the expertise and the capacity to help that you do. And so over the course of these last 4 weeks, I've been interviewed by a series of journalists and television personalities and so on here locally and a little bit adjacent to that. And they asked me, they have often asked, I should say, well, why is Purdue doing this? And my response has generally been because we could. And if you're given the capacity and capability to help, especially in a time like this when it very much is an all hands on deck, then let's use our ability to do that for some good.
I think that's awesome, and I hope you're keeping a journal of everything, because I'm envisioning the movie of what you guys have done. I'm sure you're thinking Brad Pitt would be playing Dr. Nate Hartman or something like that, but I'm envisioning the movie.
Well, that would be interesting. I had some other thoughts in mind of who would be who, but I'm an older version of Nate, and those of you that know us, you would understand exactly what I mean. But in any case,
I would cast Brad Pitt to play either one of you in the movie.
Oh no, I'm not a Brad Pitt guy. Nate can have him. But in any case, so Tom, thanks so much for this kind of special podcast, and we'll look for a couple more. Those of you listening, we want you to volunteer. Let's hear what you're doing to keep business going and help out where we can with the medical services.
Yep, absolutely. And thanks again to Dr. Nate Hartman for sharing that story. I think it's awesome. And all of you who listen, join us next week, because we're going to keep having more thoughts, ideas, and information in and around product lifecycle management. The Digital Enterprise Society, it is the place for the exchange of ideas around digital manufacturing tools. Check us out at digitalenterprisesociety.org.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you've heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org. Join us again next week for more connection without boundaries and creation without limits.